Okay, so hi everybody. How are you? I'm very sorry to be late, but I think we just had to wait a little bit to have people stop showing up at the door. Usually we start earlier than that, so if you show up to the next meetup, please try to be here at like 7:30 latest or something. Would be great. My name is Kevin. I am from the company called Chainsmiths. Chainsmiths, that's us, and we are a blockchain consultancy firm, one of the early ones. So we were set up before Hyperledger was invented, before all the things around Corda and all the weird blockchain things that you might have heard of. We are headquartered in Dublin, in Ireland, and we basically help usually bigger organizations figure out their architecture and how to solve the very specific problems about blockchain. Also, if they need a blockchain or not, because most of the time they don't, and we tell them that, but they pay us for it. So this is a good deal because we save them millions of dollars for just a few tens of thousands. Okay, so how does this work? Yeah, that's me. You can follow me on Twitter. I usually troll a lot. I try not to troll too much, but the only things I post are usually trolls. I'm here to talk about consensus, but I promised I wouldn't do a technical talk. And that's very funny because I'm not an expert on the consensus. The consensus aspect of Bitcoin is very, very important, but there are many aspects that are extremely important, and they are all, let's say, interlocked together. You can't do one thing without talking about the other ones, and I'm trying not to do 16 hours long talk, so I just try to focus on consensus. I'm not going to try to talk too much about game theory. I'm not going to try to talk too much about mining and stuff like that. And yes, I think we can talk about consensus. So, just to start, I would like to know who here would say they know quite a bit about Bitcoin, or they know how Bitcoin works. Not being expert, but just knowing a little bit. Okay, a few people. Great. Oh, yeah, nice. Okay. Who owns some cryptocurrency? A little bit. Doesn't have to be billions. Great. Okay, so that's going to be interesting. Who is not from an IT background? Okay, nice. So I'm not. So this is fine. So we're going to talk about consensus, and consensus is the word you would hear everywhere about blockchain because it's one of the very important things. But we've heard so much about blockchain recently that we believe that the blockchain just invented what consensus is. And I'm just trying to break that myth, and I'm trying to explain you what's the difference really between the blockchain and the previous systems we had. Blockchain is definitely not the first time we have distributed systems and consensus in the wide. Let's say when you pay with your credit card, you're usually dealing with a system that has a consensus in place. When you deal with your bank, you'll have the same thing. When you deal with any kind of database at scale, you would have the same kind of system. Let's say Facebook, Google, whatever. Why not? Because if they had to centralize everything in one server for the scales they have, it would just not work. So they have to replicate information. They have to think about, okay, if the person is connecting to our European server, does it make sense to think they will also contact the American server or whatever? And in most cases, it doesn't. So they can just optimize the way you communicate with their infrastructure that way. But they still need, in the end of the day, to replicate or to consolidate the information and just make one unique version of the truth. And that's what we call the consensus. But the blockchain, of course, needs that. And I'm going to go through it and show you why. But first, let's play a game. So I'm going to take some people, absolutely not randomly, but Alexis, Armando, and Lola, please. Can you come here? So the first question I would have for you, and you have, all three of you, would have to agree on an answer. And the game is to find the right answer, right? Don't cheat, or don't say weird stuff. The first question is, what is my name?
Kevin. Kevin.
Do you all agree on that?
Yes.
Great. So you have a consensus there. Second question is, what is the origin of the coffee we serve today?
Ethiopian.
I wouldn't know that. I thought Brazilian perhaps, but that's just a guess.
So what's your answer?
I guess it's.
You have to either trust us or you can say no, I don't trust
I know you guys well enough to know the circumstances, so I trust you in this case.
So what's your answer?
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. Great. What's the temperature in this room?
Do we have to say it together or not?
We have to come up with one answer.
Just give me one answer.
I'd say 17.
17 Celsius, yeah.
Really?
I think it's warmer than that. It's
The
warmer than
amount
that.
of people right here, 17? Well, I mean, we are wearing coats, so maybe, I
I'm
don't know.
not.
We're not, yeah, well.
16. 16.
16?
You're thinking we should be going higher, not lower.
No,
Right.
I would have said maybe 19. But,
We can maybe meet in the middle.
okay.
there is no consensus here.
Figure it out.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's do the middle.
Yeah, let's do the middle.
Let's do the middle. So what's that?
You
18.
said 17, I said 19, so let's say 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have no clue, but okay, that's a good answer, 18. Okay, I'm fine with that. So that's just to show you that consensus doesn't mean always the truth. It's just an agreement. So they might all be wrong. Some of them might be wrong. Some of them might know, might not know. You have different strategies to go through that. And that's really what I want to explain you and what's the context with the blockchain and what might not be the context and why you might not want the blockchain to secure that. So thank you very much for your intervention there.
Thank you.
So the consensus only works when you have different parties. If it's only me trying to guess what the temperature, even if I ask you what you all think and then in the end I decide, it's not a consensus. The consensus is when everybody agrees, or at least not everybody, like everybody that is not trying to cheat agrees on the same answer. That's when you reach consensus. And sometimes you just can't because you don't want to, because you're always sure you're right and you might not be. And that's perfectly fine, but some systems can be reaching the consensus, some might not. If I'm asking what's your favorite color, I mean, you're not going to change your favorite color just to reach the consensus. So some system just doesn't make sense. So for the different cases that you had there, sometimes everybody knows the answer. So for example, my name. Sometimes not. So for example, the origin of the coffee we are serving today. And sometimes partially not. So I didn't go for anything about partially not, but it could have been, for example, how many coffee I had today. And because I was here from the morning to right now, I mean, I've had coffee from different baristas and from different people. I even poured one myself. So they would have just to put together the kind of information, the bits of information they had, who served me what, and then in the end, reaching the consensus into, okay, I think he's got 3, 4, and agree on that. So consensus is really weird in the way it works. And sometimes people make mistakes. For example, the temperature, I mean, I have no clue how much it is, but I guess it's not exactly 18 degrees. If it is, well, congratulations. But mistakes are fine. It's just sometimes the consensus is not about finding the truth, it's about just reaching an agreement. So there are different strategies. I'm just covering 2 of them right here. There are many, many more than that. But taking the most common answer, for example, the origin of the coffee, is a very valid strategy. 2 people know it's Ethiopia, the other one doesn't know or would guess Brazil. Valid strategy is just to take the most common one for the temperature that could work as well. You can also reconcile average, so that's what they did for the temperature. It's just making an average of the temperature that everybody gave. But sometimes it just doesn't work. So right now it was just human beings, so they could adapt their strategy for the answer they had. But if it was a program, let's say a software, that is preconceived and just you have to put the rules before it executes, let's say for the temperature, you would ask 3 people or 3 sensors to give you the temperature. If you chose the wrong strategy, it might be completely wrong. Let's say if you take the average and one of the people just say it's about 1 million degrees. The average is just going to be completely off. So sometimes it's not the right strategy either. And if you don't know what kind of result you're going to get, it's really hard to find a strategy beforehand. Of course, afterwards, if it's, let's say, for the coffee, Ethiopia and Brazil, you're not going to take an average in between Ethiopia and Brazil. So you really kind of have to know already what kind of attacks you can survive and what kind of information you're trying to get at the output. And there is actually a third strategy that is going back to a default value. So if you don't know, you might want something else. So what could be a good example of that? Yeah, I don't know right now, but let's say taking a bet. If you don't agree that, I don't know, yeah, you're taking a bet with somebody, and if you don't agree with the result, sometimes it might be just better not to play. So if all of you don't agree on the same answer for this bet, you just all decide not to play at all, so you are not losing money. So sometimes you have just a default value that has nothing to do with the individual values, but it just brings you back to a safe point where everybody is safer than taking a stupid risk. Yeah, so the goal, as I said earlier, the consensus is usually about getting a unique solution. It's not about getting the solution you think is the best, it's really about everybody agreeing to a unique solution. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, so sometimes you should not use a consensus, but in many things, especially like computer and very critical systems, reaching a very specific value that everything agrees on is much better, so you can then make sure that the further computations are also good. The solution should be okay for everybody, so it doesn't have to be the best, and that's also very important. That's typically the behavior they had about the temperature. It might not be the one they guessed, but they are okay with this result. It might not be the best they would have seen, but they're fine with it. They're not going to lose money or whatever. So then when you add game theory on top of that, I promised I wouldn't talk about it, so I won't, but when you add some rules of the game about if they reply well, I give them money, if they are wrong, they give me money, they might have different incentives there depending on how sure they are of their answer or how far they think they're going to be. And it should resist failure, which is missing, wrong information, sometimes lying. But for example, for the origin of the coffee or the temperature, obviously somebody will have missing information or sometimes wrong information. And you have to build a system that can survive without it and can go further. Because if you stop completely the system, then you are stuck for the next steps. So how does that work in the real world? So this is a pretty common meme we have in crypto, but this is actually from just the traditional finance. So it's how the markets work. So it's just a normal day at the most important financial institution. Somebody is just talking about a stock that could excel, and then somebody just here really excel, and then somebody just here excel and sell. And it continues, and they just say, oh, this is madness, I can't take it anymore. Goodbye, bye. And in the end there you have, hey, I've got a stock here that could really excel, etc. So sometimes you just can't reach consensus because the system is just not stable. And this is fine as well. So the lesson for the day is just that consensus is a very specific technical thing that is about reaching a single point. And sometimes it doesn't work. In a market, the whole point is not to have consensus. The market has to move. Some people will have a gain, some people will have a loss. That's fine, that's part of the game. If the market was at consensus that, oh yeah, today the price of Apple is perfect, it's not going to move anymore, we have the perfect pricing. That wouldn't work. You must have different information, different hype, different hopes, and stuff like that. So let's take an example for a technical version of that. So yeah, I did the slides this afternoon, so I had to figure out what I could use as an example. So in case you don't know, this thing is now gone and threw a car in space for whatever reason. So in a system like that, so this is a critical system. That's the kind of stuff you don't want to take any risk with. And it's also very technical, very complex in terms of how many different components interact with each other. And even if each component is, especially in space industry, if any component is like the most reliable you can find, there is still risk that at some point one of them will misbehave. And one misinformation might just go up all the other components and just bring a critical failure. That happens all the time because there are so many components. So even if you have a failure rate of 1 out of a billion, it will happen at some point. So what kind of failure we can think of here? Okay, so so you have 3 boosters there. So that's the 3 you can see there, basically, right? That's the 3 rockets. Oops. So you have 3 boosters, and sometimes when something goes wrong with this kind of system, you really have to destroy it, because if it goes the wrong way and it just go crash into a town, you have really big problems. But you also know that the system for the auto-destruction might fail somehow because of a wrong sensor, because of a wrong order or whatever. So you don't want the thing to auto-destruct every time there is something weird about the system. So you need a consensus into all the critical system, and this is one of them. So let's say Elon Musk, this guy, is not happy. He's like, no, this is not working. The rocket is actually going to my hometown instead of space. So I need to trigger an auto-destruct event. So in this kind of, like, what it should do in the best world situation is that it's sending an order like auto-destruct, and then everything works fine. All 3 of them get destroyed, and it explodes, and great. Everything is fine. Now, you can imagine that there is a technical failure. So this guy is happy, he's not saying anything. He's like, wow, great, we're going to Mars. And this thruster is like, oh wow, I just got a message, or there is something critical happening, I need to explode. Before doing that, fucking up the whole money of this company, it's gonna check, hey, maybe I need to check with the other things if they have the same information as I do, because we know systems are not always reliable. They just can't be. Even people are not always reliable, they can't be. Misinformation and stuff like that. So this system, instead of exploding and just breaking everything, is gonna check with the other 2, hey, did you get an information that we have a problem? And he's gonna check with this one is like no, and this one is no. So he's like, okay, let's take the average. I have 2 yes, 1 no, we're not going to explode. When it gets interesting is that you also have failure for the other direction. Like this one didn't receive the order, but the other 2 can still trigger an explosion event, because 2 no, 1 yes, it's working, we can destroy the thing. We can go further by like having an attacker in the system. So I love the picture I put there, because I don't know if it will work, but yeah, it's like the same face. So in a system where you might have an attacker and you don't know who is wrong there, it might be this one that believes the signal is wrong, like just typical failure, or it could be this guy just sending the message to one of them. The system must reach a consensus, technical consensus, and not trigger weird events. So consensus systems need to be okay with failure, but also with attacks. So this kind of system, when it's checking with everybody else and just taking an average, is what we call typically the Byzantine fault tolerance, so PDFT system. This one has a resiliency of 1/3. So we have 4 parties, we have the 3 thrusters, and we have Elon Musk. It's working as long as I have less than 1/3 of the system attacking. If I have 2/3, let's say if another rocket is like red, or if Elon Musk is just sending the information to 2 of them or whatever, or one of them is just an attacker and be like, I'm sending yes to this one but no to this one. You reach situations where consensus cannot be reached, or you might have the wrong consensus, which might be even worse. So consensus systems that we have in the traditional world are usually secure on the other third of the system. So if you have 100 people, 33 people are enough. Well, 34 people are enough to break the system at some point. So today it works great, as said. 1/3 of the faults, not that great. So what's new with blockchain? So we've had, coming back a step, like we have had databases doing this kind of stuff with your bank and stuff, like when you are to the ATM, and if you do a transaction online with your computer at the exact same time, what happens to the number in your account? The computer can actually subtract the amount of money you are removing by the ATM and also subtract the amount of money that you're taking online. If it's happening exactly at the same time on the server, if you don't have a proper consensus system, it might just forget about none of the transaction or anything. And these are very, very practical attacks today. So we know it works with the traditional consensus, as I'm showing, with 1/3 of attackers. So what's new with the blockchain? The blockchain is very different because in the blockchain world, like Bitcoin or whatever else, I'm talking about public blockchains, but we can go further and talk about permission ledgers as well. In the blockchain world, we're not starting with the assumption that we are just facing normally okay people and maybe some system will have failures and maybe a few people will attack us. We start from the principle that it's a mayhem. It's everybody wants to extract money out of it. Everybody wants to be rich. Everybody wants to attack the other people and try to steal their money. This is very different because when you think like that, 1/3 is really not enough. And also knowing that we will get attacked just because the design of Bitcoin and stuff are very anti-order, anti-government, anti-banks and stuff like that. We know we will get attacked. So what will happen when we get attacked? And the whole thinking behind that is very, very different. So a consensus should always give one answer, the same answer to everybody that is not attacking. That's the first step. The second one is, what is the risk if we don't reach only one agreement? So if we have two consensus, if we have these guys, the blue versus the red, which one is right? I mean, we'll never reach consensus in a 1/3 system. So we reach two consensus. So we reach two versions of the truth, and that's what we call a consensus failure, which is really bad. We don't know what's the truth, we don't know who is winning, or we don't know how much money I have in my bank account, or we don't know this stuff. This is really, really bad. So what can happen? And that's extremely huge because in a traditional system, you can rewrite the data. You can choose which one is the truth, but that also includes the past. I don't know many systems who have a proper time lock who can, like, if you reach a problem in the consensus at time t, you cannot change the past previous to that. Most of them are like, if you reach a new consensus, or if you manage to attack it, you can just rewrite the whole history and give it to the other guys, and they will accept it as the truth. This is insane. So right now, how does the bank protect themselves? It's just that they have a copy somewhere, and the admin can just restart the system. When we reach consensus failure, we just stop the system, we restart it, and we put it back to the last backup. Bitcoin doesn't really work like that, although it could if we wanted, but it doesn't. So we need 1/3 to attack the system, but 1/3 of what? Because I gave numbers, but I didn't explain what is what. So what is a third? I mean, a server, great. So if you know a little bit about IT, you know that a server, from another server perspective, might just be an IP address or something like that. Doesn't have to be a physical machine. I mean, my machine doesn't have eyes. It can check that it's one CPU. I could lie about the number of IP I own. I could just buy a lot of cheap servers on AWS and start attacking the system. So one of the attacks is called a Sybil attack, which is if I have a group like that, if I have a group like that, instead of trying to corrupt the red guy, I'm the blue because I like blue. Instead of corrupting the red guys to actually join me and get a third, why not just bringing a lot of new blue guys until we have like 100 of them, and then it's like consensus is reached. And that's very valid attack. So if you're talking about 1/3 without knowing who the people are, without putting a limit on who can vote, we have a massive problem. So the only solution to not letting any single participant to bring a lot of friends with him, or a lot of servers, a lot of IPs, a lot of whatever, civils, we call that. So if you want to prevent the civil attack, you have to create an identity or an authority system. Which means that you only allow these people in the picture to vote or to draw. But that creates another problem because now I know who are the people to vote. So I can go threaten their families, I can break their fingers, I can do stuff to them, and then, oh wow, they just become blue, and I'm winning as well. Very, very legit problem when you're talking about breaking finance. Like we're changing the world, we need to be protected against that. We don't want a few, military guys to go corrupt Bitcoin and take over. This would be really bad. In the bank, as I said, if something like this happened, at some point we get like a trial or something that would restart the servers and just cancel the wrong things and everything is fine in the best of the world. So another thing is that the risk, as I said, if we were to be able to rewrite history, is what we call the wipeout attack. The wipeout attack is just to remove the past, and then because, like, if you reach the new consensus, it's the attackers are actually reaching the new consensus. You can just tell every other server that your consensus is the right one, and from a technical perspective, they will agree with you. So they will just accept your new version of the database or your new version of the data as a real one. So you might just erase everything in the past and just be like, I'm the rich guy in the world and nobody else has money. Technically, it might work. In Bitcoin, because nobody's in charge, we can't allow something like that to happen. If somebody is able to rewrite the whole blockchain and take all the Bitcoin, what do I have? Who do I complain to? Do I go to the police? Oh no, because I don't know who is playing in the blockchain. So we need a new thing. Consensus is important, but as said, PBFT or like the kind of consensus we're using today, they just don't work. We can't do that. So we have two things to fix. We can't let people know who we are, but otherwise they will just figure out who to control, who to threaten, and take over the network. But we can't allow civil attacks because otherwise I would just start 1,000 computers and just decide that I'm the rich guy and I have all the Bitcoins. We also want to prevent wipeout attacks, because if or when somebody will break the consensus in Bitcoin, we don't want them to be able to rewrite the whole history. We are okay if they manage to break it, but we don't want to break it too much. Okay? It's like, give us time to fix it, break a little bit, we'll know something is happening, so we'll stop transacting, but please don't erase the past. And this is very important stuff. So this is what brought the mining process that we have in Bitcoin, which is part of the consensus algorithm. So if you're fan of mining and that we're burning a lot of electricity and polluting the planet and stuff, it's because it's the only way we have today to do a consensus that is fixing the problem I was saying earlier. And yeah, so that's a mining farm. This is Antminers in their new data center in China. It's pretty big. This is, I don't know how many square meter, but this is a very, very huge farm. So this solution is called the Nakamoto consensus. It's the main innovation behind Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a lot of really good innovation. The game theory and everything is amazing, but the Nakamoto consensus is probably the one that is the breakthrough. It's an addition of a lot of different technologies. I'm not going to the details, but it's pretty basic in terms of computer science. It's just the way that it's put together that is insane, and nobody have thought of it before. But what it does is two things. Verifying that the transactions are valid. So of course, if you don't have the money, you can't spend it. First step. Second step is when you accept a bunch of transactions, you also have to add the solution to a problem that takes 10 minutes on average. 10 minutes to solve if and only if everybody in the world trying to do this is collaborating. So nobody is an attacker in these 10 minutes. So what happens if there are attackers where they are increasing the time you need to solve it, but for them it's just insane because they probably don't have enough computational power to solve this problem alone. So we are talking about computational power, it's a lot of it, and if everybody is working together at the same time, which is what we're doing right now, it takes 10 minutes to find a solution to add a block, and then 10 minutes and 10 minutes on average. It's very important for one reason. So Bitcoin is slow, yes, but it's important. So if you want to attack it, you have to divert power, so computational power, let's say the farm I was showing before. You have to divert it from the group of honest people. And you can't leave it with the honest guys trying to mine the block in 10 minutes, plus attack at the same time. It's one or the other. You can only give one vote with your new CPU or computational power. It's either the good one, or it's another one, a different one. But in the long term, you will just never find a block, because you're competing with everybody else and you will take much more time. So you can't lie on two chains at the same time. This is technical. I'm not going to explain that too much. I guess we'll do a talk on mining at some point. But this is very specific, and that's a big difference with, if you've heard of proof of stake and the other consensus protocols, this is the hard one to solve. We want people, or computers, not to be able to give two different answers with the same time, or the same computational power as they are giving. So with proof of stake or stuff like that, you can still give two answers. You can say to somebody, hey, I found a new block, it says red, and to somebody else, hey, I found a new block, it says blue when you find a block. In Bitcoin, you cannot change what's inside the block, and you have to spend the time working on top of this answer. So you have to give your answer first, basically. Well, select your answer first, and then you have to mine on top of it for like 10 minutes. So this is very different, and this is the only problem we are trying to really fix, because, yeah, we are taking a lot of electricity and stuff to mine, but right now, it doesn't really exist. Yes?
Kind of right and kind of wrong. I mean, the difference between proof of work and proof of stake is how you reach consensus. With proof of work, it's based on CPU power, which is a physical thing that you have to do. With proof of stake, what they do to solve the nothing at stake problem is to make it so that you lose your stake if you voted the wrong one.
Yes.
But the problem with proof of stake, in my opinion at least, over proof of work is that it's an inherently oligarchical structure. And over time, the people with large stake, economically speaking or mathematically speaking, will always become more powerful. And this is the core problem of proof of stake, is that the consensus is broken down over time, just like it is in a democracy that has cronyism. It's the exact same thing.
You could even argue that mining, or at least the control of ASICs, is the same.
No, because even if you have ASICs, you still have an improvement in hardware over time. And that is, it's like a natural death, like when people die. Like this is the core of why proof of work works better over time than proof of stake.
I could argue with that on the supply chain and everything. So yes, proof of stake has solution for this two chains things, which is that if you're trying to do two at the same time, you might be punished on one of your stake. That's too technical. I'm not going into it.
It's very complicated.
It's very complicated, and it's still based on what we call game theory, which is assuming that people act rationally, and that might not be the case. And also to go back in history with one of the systems, let's say proof of work, so like what Bitcoin is doing, mining, you need to redo the work that the honest blocks have put. So even if somebody takes over, they can, let's say, throw their new block there, but if they want to change something in the past, they have to recompute all these hashes, so all these 10 minutes blocks that have been done in the past. That will cost them a lot of money and take a lot of time. Probably more time that we need to actually fix it or mitigate it somehow. Unless the attacker has been working from a specific point, so he's not trying to change the past, he just started to attack in the past, but we didn't notice somehow, and he's pushing the results sometime in the future. So, against an attack like that, we would see that on average we are taking more than 10 minutes, so something is happening, some of the power has been diverted, so we can start looking into it and how much and stuff like that. So we can measure what potential attack might be happening just by counting the time it takes between blocks. Even without seeing the attack, we can figure out how much power has been diverted from the network, which is pretty interesting. So in Bitcoin, today you have no identity, no authority, and let's hope for that to continue. Why? Because we don't want people to take control. So the only way to prevent that is just to make sure that anybody can join, and anything can join, and we don't even have to be a person, or you can have as many accounts or as many addresses as you want, because that's part of it. But we also need to make it Sybil attack resistant, so the only way to prove that is just by burning electricity. You can mine with as many addresses or as many computers, names, or whatever you want to call it, with as many different identities as you want on the network. You still need to burn the electricity, so you would have to split the total amount of power into different names. So the amount of power you are throwing to your attack doesn't matter on the amount of identities you are actually using to try to hide you. We would figure out, the amount of the attack is actually the electricity you burn. It's not anything else. So this is the protection against Sybil attack. It's just a physical limit, which is the electricity or the work on a physics term, the work that you throw at the system, the entropy. And attacks in the past are very, very hard, which is very different from a database. We are not going to throw a backup when the system is broken, so we need to make sure that changing the past is really hard, even if an attack is actually happening. Okay, so I think I'm reaching the end soon. So Bitcoin, it has drawbacks. I'm not saying that Bitcoin or the consensus algorithm we have in the blockchains are better than the traditional consensus as I was explaining in like the Rocket or whatever. Absolutely not. We are much slower than any of the previous systems that have been existing for 30, 40 years. So technically we're like shit, really slow, never use that. Much more expensive, like scale, which is insane because we need to burn electricity that the other servers don't have to. And we cannot handle high volumes yet. So never use a blockchain type, public blockchain type algorithm. I don't even know how to call that. So let's say Bitcoin. Never use Bitcoin if you don't need it, because it's going to be the worst choice you would have done. You really need to need it. And to need it would be, I don't know, maybe for money without the state controlling it, if you think that's valuable to you. But that's not enough, because there is something else, and that's, if nobody is in control, how do you improve the system? And that's very difficult. Like, what if I want Bitcoin to be faster, to be more secure? Or, oh wow, we see there is an attack coming. How do we upgrade the system to be resilient to this attack in the future? And that's extremely difficult, and that's called, it has a name, it's a social consensus. So everything I've been talking about until now was a technical consensus. It's a set of rules that are put in the software and are going to execute automatically. It's checking that on average we take 10 minutes to mine a block, and if it's shorter than that, it means that there is more power than we thought, so it's going to make the blocks harder to find until it's 10 minutes on average. But if we need to do an upgrade, there is no voting possible, because we said we don't want identity, so we can't vote. And also anybody could create accounts of fake IDs, because we just don't do identity. So we have a problem, we can't vote. It's annoying. So right now we are using some kind of meritocracy system, which is that the actual software you download, the actual Bitcoin software you download, you take the one you would prefer, and usually you take the one that everybody else prefer. That's not based on any kind of statistics or number. It's just you talk to other people and you tell them, hey, which Bitcoin client do you use? So for Bitcoin right now, all the mining and stuff is done on something called Bitcoin Core. They are the best team by far working on Bitcoin, but if they start doing some crappy changes, we will all switch to another team. This is just how it works. The way they do the changes in the software, because it's all based on software, is about improvements that are not at the cost of something else. And this is very difficult, and that's why Bitcoin is extremely slow to change. It's the one that has at least that forks the least. It's the hardest to change, because every time there is a change, they try to not upset anybody. So if you want faster blocks or faster transactions, it cannot be at the cost of security. And today we don't really know how to do that, so we just don't change it. And everything we change is usually an improvement for some people. It doesn't have to be an improvement for everybody, but it cannot be at the detriment of somebody in the system. That's kind of the ideology behind Bitcoin today. This is really bad for innovation, I'm just saying. We just don't have any other things. And then there is the last way to do consensus change, which is what they call the forking off. And I have the picture of the last guy who did that. So this guy is Roger Ver. He was a Bitcoin investor, one of the early ones, very, very rich guy. And he's not happy with the way Bitcoin is going for whatever reason, political reasons. So he bought a lot of things because he has a lot of money. So he bought the domain name bitcoin.com. That's pretty decent. And on bitcoin.com, he would tell you that the real Bitcoin is something called Bitcoin Cash, which is another chain. They just took Bitcoin, they changed a few things, and then it creates a new chain from a specific point in time, which was the 1st of August last year. So now you have two chains. You have the original Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Core chain, and you have the new fork, which is called the Bitcoin Cash chain. And they are not, of course, compatible, right? A Bitcoin Cash is not equal to a Bitcoin. But for people, it's very confusing, and that's the whole point. That's the whole strategy behind it, is that they are trying to confuse people and to get money out of them for political reasons. But it's also a tool, and it's fine. We are all anarchists in here. So we can't prevent people to fork a coin and to create their own coin, to create an altcoin. This is perfectly fine, and it's the market and the people who will choose which one to follow. So people who want to create their own fork of Bitcoin, if you want to create the Bitcoin Portugal or whatever, go ahead, do it. You probably will have nobody on your chain, so you'll be wasting your time, wasting the electrical power to secure it because you cannot mine both chains at the same time, and stuff like that. So that was just the last point, that when something goes wrong, you just fork the chain, and you hope for the best, that you will reach social consensus and that people will follow you. But that's a very different kind of consensus, and that's it for tonight, I think. Yes. No. Yeah, Fox next week. Yeah. So yeah, Stefan there is going to talk about the forks, but much more technical. I don't know how technical it will be, but it will talk about hard fork, soft fork. Yeah, a lot of things. So if you're interested in the topic, be there Saturday next week. 17th, yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Do we do any Q&A after the beer?
Do you have questions now, maybe?
I mean, I can always ask you.
That was a question?
No, that was a statement.
Maybe. Any question?
I have one question. Can we have like a distributed proof of work?
Yes. Okay. What do you mean by distributed proof of work?
You know, it doesn't have to be like broadcast to everyone, you know? Just in one area, you know, like in networking protocols or SPF, for example, when they reach consensus, they work in areas, and they usually have like a main area, like area 0, and any other area is connected to area 0, and you don't have to, you know, to transmit to other areas like all the information in your area, just something meaningful to them, you know?
Yeah, so I have two answers to that. One of them, which would be the most basic one, is that the choice of 10 minutes is to not need this. It's so slow that you have much more than enough time to propagate, so you don't have to go only for your part of the network. You can propagate to anybody else in the world because that would take half a second or whatever. The other thing is that mining pools, if you've heard of mining pools, they work that way. So the Stratum protocol is about making your proof of work simpler and working with other people. You collect this together, and you can actually work on the main protocol. So that's how the solo miners and people like you and me, if we wanted to mine, would mine on Bitcoin. We cannot compete with the bigger miners, so we are just going to collude together, working together on a specific pool. And instead of mining a block, I'm mining bits of this block. So have a look at the Stratum protocol.
Is there any coin, you know, coin market cap that is using the distributed proof of work?
Ethereum is trying to implement sharding, but trying to read into it is like really complicated.
Yeah, and that would be on proof of stake anyway, I guess.
Doing it without compromising the security of the network is almost impossible.
So yeah, most of the ones that will be looking into that are not using proof of work. So who else is using sharding and IOTA, but it's not even a blockchain. So yeah, you have different ways to do things like this. But it's very difficult because you need to make sure you're on the right chain. So if you have to wait for the reconciliation of your cluster to the rest of the chain to know if you can mine the next block if you find something, and if it's wrong, the cost of that is huge. It's all the time for reconciliation that you're wasting power or time. Yeah.
I have something related to that with the farms, the mining farms. That don't you end up with a situation similar to the proof of stake, that you can have different stakers of the pool, mining pool, that will shit.
Yes.
Some that will not do the work, but will just give a random answer.
The main difference, if we're like proof of stake is very abstract, but if we're talking about the kind of proof of stake that Ethereum wants to add, there is no
I'm
cost.
talking about the traditional mining pools.
Yeah, I understand. But yeah, let me go through proof of stake first. So there is no actual cost into stacking your coins. You just have to buy the coin and then let them sit there. And if you mine, you get new coins on top of that, right? Then you have some other proof of stake mechanism that force you to burn some coins. So even if you're trying to stake and you are failing, you are going to lose some of your money without even attacking the system. And that's interesting because it puts a cost on it. Bitcoin always have a cost. So when you're mining, you're burning electricity. So even if you're mining, you would need some kind of income. And the income you get is by the mining, you get the mining reward, but so you have to resell these coins somehow to pay for your electricity bill. Otherwise, there is a problem there. I mean, how do you afford your costs? So in a staking system, you might not have any costs once you own the coins. In mining, even if you own the data centers, you still need to pay for electricity. So you cannot just stack all the coins and keep them for you. That's part of the game theory around it. So yes, you're going to grow in terms of money, but how do you value money? Is it the bitcoins you have? Is it the cash you have? You know, if you're just thinking about power, like reinvesting all your gains into buying bigger farms, yes, sure. But at some point, yes, you could. But at some point, getting more than, I think it's 25 or something, like there are numbers. When you get a certain amount of percentage of the network, it's decreasing, like the amount you earn is decreasing when you increase your stake. It costs you more to increase your stake than actually the amount of money you get on top of that. Just because there is a balance into it, like there is a right number, right share of the network to own to maximize your profit. And usually people will try to maximize their profit. Now, if you want to attack the network, yeah, sure, just buy everything, spend money on it. That would work. It's a valid attack. Mining at loss and stuff like that would work.
But it costs a lot.
Cost a lot.
To the point that no one does it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's the point.
You get a few financial institutions to compete against each other, and then it just becomes irrelevant, that argument, right?
So how much did the stock market lose yesterday? I don't know.
9% or something like that.
But that was like, in terms of real number, a huge amount. Like Bitcoin doesn't exist next to it, the whole market cap. So the cost of attacking such a system is very, very far from the money you could use to attack it.
What do you think about Lightning networks?
Which one, sorry?
Lightning networks.
Yeah.
What do you think about its perspectives?
It's amazing.
Amazing?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the question, sorry.
Could you explain it?
Next one, sure.
Yeah. So Lightning Networks is amazing. It's also very technical. The way it works is that you lock some money with another participant, and you are able then to, like, when you lock money, let's say I put €100 with Alexis, 0.01 Bitcoin with Alexis there. I can now use this money that is locked. It's still mine technically, but it's locked on the Bitcoin network. I can use up to that money to transact with him off-chain without recording the transaction on-chain. And when I reach this limit, when I spend my €100, then we settle on the blockchain. So we send one transaction that say, hey, now this €100 is going to Alexis. Okay? That's a channel. And now the network allows me to pay anybody that Alexis is connected to going through Alex. So that's a bit more complicated because I could pay Carlos by routing through Alexis if I don't have a channel with Carlos. Okay? But at the end of the day, we don't want this system to be KYC, so we don't want to know who the people are, so we need a way to automate that and go through the cheapest path because Alexis might be charging me a fee to use that service.
There's multi-channel payment channels now. Just
Yeah,
last week.
It's pretty insane. I mean, I can't even follow that.
Like, let's say you have 5 different channels for each of 20, then you can pool those together to pay a single person 100, for example.
What kind of problems stop it from expanding now?
Bugs. Development. Yeah, it's technical, so we need to make sure it works.
Just technical?
Yeah, but just, it's breakthrough crypto, right?
And how hard these problems?
How hard are these problems? So, not talking about security, today the problems are really into bugs in the software. That might be by making sure we have the amount of money available right now on the network. because all the hubs could be trying to lie or having other hubs being used at the same time, and you need to have this kind of consensus mechanism from a distributed perspective, reconciling. But we're also, like Lightning is also a distributed system on top of Bitcoin. So how do you make sure that this distributed system without proof of work is actually reconciling? Because if there is a problem in the balance there, it's impossible to settle. So we have to make sure that the money is actually locked and you're not double spending it. And without the proof of work, it's really difficult. And it's based on like onion routing, so you need to know the onion routing protocols to start that. And even onion routing for me is like, oh shit,
it's kind of proof of stake over proof of work.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's basically it, because the channel is your stake. It's what you can get punished for if you try attacking. You want to add something?
Yeah. So with blockchains at the moment, we're only talking about atomic transactions. The next level of complexity that we'll see in the next couple of years is atomic trades as well, which basically is a different mathematical problem. You have Byzantine generals problem, and then you have the two generals problem. Basically, the two generals problem is like the Byzantine generals problem squared, because you don't just have the block leader choosing what happened. You have everybody in the market bidding for what happened, and it just
you already have some proof
it'll
of concept
take
of that.
Probably 10 years before we have all of this solved.
Maybe
more, I don't know.
Yeah, you have some proof of concepts between the SegWit on Litecoin and the Lightning from Bitcoin. So people are already exploring that, but security is just far away.
Yeah.
Doing it, yeah. Making it secure, no.
What are your thoughts on the hash graph and the consensus behind it?
Exactly. So that's back to the previous slides. For me, it's just another kind of distributed system without security of Bitcoin. I didn't go through the hash graph paper because to me it's just another one like IOTA, like what else did we hear recently? I mean, there are so many of them that I just.
Right.
But Byteballs, yeah, maybe. I don't know what they use. But yeah, I mean, Hashgraph, first of all, they have like patents of whatever. So I mean, if you put a patent on some kind of a distributed system, it doesn't make any sense. Because it's distributed. You want people to join it and to create implementations for it. If you have a patent, I mean, this is pretty bad. On top of that, I think it's based on DAGs. I mean, I'm not sure. I need to really read the paper.
I think it's got Gossip Protocol on both.
Okay.
Yeah.
A DAG means a directed signal. So Ryblox, IOTA, Byteballs, like all of these are all DAGs.
And this is like old tech again. It's nothing new, nothing breakthrough. If you have attackers.
The problem is they don't provide settlement finality. They just can't.
Yeah.
So for Hashgraph specifically, I need to go through the paper, and I really don't have the motivation right now. So I wouldn't put too much effort into it. This is my answer.
That was my question.
Really?
Yeah. It's cool, I'm glad he answered.
Stefan, do you have some more to add on that? Hashgraph?
No, I don't.
Could a quantum computer successfully attack the blockchain or Bitcoin network?
Yes, but how? I mean, a normal computer could as well if it's powerful enough. So having a quantum computer doesn't make the attack instant. This is not click, you find a solution. It's again based on computational power. So at equivalent computational power, yeah, probably a quantum computer would be faster, but it would still need to reach massive scale, and it doesn't exist today. Then you have the different kind of things that a quantum computer do better than a traditional chip. So the kind of stuff that it might do better is solving the elliptic curve, but it doesn't solve the SHA-256 algorithm better, or I mean, like, fractionally better, nothing. So it depends on the problem. What do you want to add?
Why
Bitcoin
attack
wouldn't be
the
broken.
blockchain anyway? Like, you wouldn't attack the mining with a quantum computer, you would attack the keys, right?
Exactly, but if you attack the keys, like, it's pretty much protected against that by having 2 rounds of SHA, on Bitcoin at least, 2 rounds of SHA-256 before revealing your public key. if you don't transact, and you're not supposed to reuse the same address twice. So if you use the protocol that it should be, you are not vulnerable.
But from a game theory point of view, if someone did manage to steal all the Bitcoin, then the value of Bitcoin would go to zero anyway.
And there are like already protocols, algorithms that are resistant to quantum computers. They work. They're just more heavy, so it's useless to implement them before an attack, just because it would cost much more money and much more memory and the phones and stuff like
Well,
that.
the only reason we haven't swapped to Lamport signatures is not because we don't have them, it's just because they're more expensive to use in the network and there's no reason to do it right now. Like, it's like a flip of a switch, change out the signature algorithm, and then it's not a problem anymore. You just use Lamport signatures instead of a SecP 256K1, which is the one.
But that would be really shit as a user experience. So for now.
Yeah.
Like Zcash and stuff like that. It's just not usable. We don't need that today. We're trying to find other solutions that might be better for the network. But going like full hardcore on the problem that is barely existing. Yeah.
But it's good progress, right? Despite the slowness.
It's progressing. It is, but research is research. It can't just happen like that. And then you have to implement it. That's another step again. Yeah. We're good?
Yeah.
Beer?
Sweet, thank you.